How much does your lifestyle affect your brain health? And how does one take the best care of this vital organ?
And breathe with your belly.
American psychiatrist and brain disorder specialist Daniel Amen believes almost every aspect of your life has a measurable impact on your brain. He says standard psychiatric practice largely ignores how these external factors can help shape our behavior.
Because the trouble is on the left side. Right here, where this hole is, you don't have holes in your brain. What it means is really low blood flow.
Right.
This is classically physical trauma pattern.
Amen uses a technique called SPECT scans to view and compare images of his patients' brain activity to those of healthy brains. He says his method provides a much clearer picture of how what we do hurts our brains and how to heal them.
Look at your brain.
While critics say the science behind SPECT is unproven and that the scans expose patients to unnecessary radiation, this doctor to the stars makes a strong case for his methods and tells the Inner View about what he's learned from his unique brain scanning approach. Dr. Daniel Amen joins us now on the Inner View. He's a board-certified psychiatrist and an expert on brain disorders. Thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to this discussion. What is the big problem with our brains?
Well, most people don't care about them. It controls everything you do, how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. But because most people never look at their brains, they don't care. And so then they do things that hurt them, like hitting soccer balls with their head, or drinking too much alcohol, or using drugs, or not sleeping.
How much can we learn from those SPECT scans that you do?
Changed everything that I do as a psychiatrist. So I've been looking at the brain with a study called brain SPECT imaging, single photon emission computed tomography. It's a nuclear medicine study that looks at blood flow and energy levels in the brain. And when I first scanned myself in 1991, I really didn't care about my own brain. And then I saw it wasn't really very healthy. And I changed everything over the last couple of decades because I want a better brain. With a better brain, you always have a better life. And so some of the big lessons, as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. So I had to lose 25 pounds. Playing football, American football or soccer causes brain damage. And undiagnosed brain injuries are a major cause of psychiatric problems. I learned that infections like COVID causes inflammation in your brain and makes you more vulnerable to anxiety and depression. But the big lesson I learned is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better, and I can prove it.
And I've seen some of your expressions of proof and you putting it out there. Now, for me, just looking at it, I can clearly see the difference between when you show an Alzheimer's patient versus what you would call a healthy brain. The rest of it, I'm going to have to trust you, right? I mean, I see sometimes a brain looking less full than another, and you would say that one is more healthy than the other. How much of room is there for subjectivity when it comes to this? How solid is the science?
Well, there are over 15,000 scientific abstracts on brain SPECT imaging if you go to pubmed.gov today. It's so much better than if you don't have any imaging and you're trying to manage a neurological or psychiatric patient. Is it perfect? Probably not. But I can clearly tell, actually my 8-year-old grandson can tell, healthy or not, underactive or overactive. And then we take the scans and use them to target treatment to your brain rather than just a cluster of symptoms.
So let me ask you, would you have somebody who's not feeling well but has a healthy brain under the scan? And on the flip side, would you have somebody whose brain looks a wreck according to the scan, but they feel fine?
Yes, because behavior is more complicated. So when I see patients, I always think of them in 4 big circles. So what's the biology? So the physical function of your brain and body. What's your psychology? How do you think? What's the social circle? What's happening in your life? And what's the spiritual circle, which is ultimately, why do you care? You can have a healthy brain and have a terribly undisciplined mind, right? You can have a healthy brain, go through the pandemic, be isolated, and get depressed. Or you can have a healthy brain going through a divorce and be sad and anxious. Have a healthy brain, have no meaning and purpose in your life, and feel off. But most psychiatrists never look at the brain. And so that whole brain health part often becomes ignored. And so if you want a healthy life, you need a healthy brain and a healthy mind and healthy connections and a sense of purpose. So I've never said, oh, get a scan and make it better and everything will be better. You have to get all 4 of these circles working together. And the flip side of your question, can you have a troubled brain and not have any symptoms? Well, we know that Alzheimer's disease starts in the brain decades before you have any symptoms. So you might think you're fine, but you're 10 years away or 5 years away from Alzheimer's disease, which is why I mean, we screen hearts and bones and breasts. Why don't we screen the brain to know that it's healthy or not?
That's a fair point. In my youth, I played football or soccer. It's called different things all over the world. I headed the ball a lot. Sometimes there were clashes of heads. I also played cricket. I was hit on the head by the ball a couple of times. I don't feel as if my brain was damaged by it, but would it, if you had to hazard a guess, would it have done some sort of damage long term?
Yes, your brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Your skull is really hard and has sharp bony ridges. Would we see the effects? Probably. Could we make them better? Probably. And some people don't notice. It could take their IQ, their intelligence from, say, 130, which is really high, to 115, which is still high. So they might not notice the difference, but it might be harder to get to whatever your full potential is. And I see my job is optimizing people's brains rather than, giving them you're depressed, you're anxious, a diagnosis. I'd much rather help people have better brains than treat whatever disorder they think they might have.
I was set to work for NASA, and hitting that ball meant that I'm doing this show now. But I mean, I'm still, I feel fortunate that I get to talk to you. I want to talk about the worst of the worst and some serious sort of pathologies that emerge from brain damage and this is murky and subjective and controversial stuff for many people. Let me begin by asking you about Kip Kinkle, the kid who shot up his school. Tell us about him, and let's explore some of the worst after that.
It's just a heartbreaking story. In April of 1998, he brought weapons to school and got suspended, got taken to jail, and his parents picked him up around 6 o'clock that night. And somewhere between 6 o'clock that night and 8 o'clock the next morning, he murdered his mother and father. And then he went to his high school in Springfield, Oregon, and shot 25 people. Based on my work, they did a SPECT scan at Oregon Health Sciences University, and they used the scan at trial. And the doctor sent me the scan so I could see them. They were, for a 15-year-old, it was the worst scan that I had ever seen. And they used the scans at trial. It didn't change his sentence. I mean, he shot and murdered people, and it shouldn't have changed his sentence. But clearly severely damaged. And he murdered his mom and dad. We actually never really found out why. Was it a lack of oxygen? Was it a toxin? Was it an infection?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so what you mean is, how did his brain get that bad? You're speculating. What could it have been in his early years that made his brain so bad at 15 years old? And I'm interested in hearing you say that it shouldn't have changed his sentence, because for some people, there is the question of justice and free will. If his brain was that bad and he was that damaged, how much of it was really him and how much of it was just him being a sick kid with a really damaged brain from childhood?
Yeah, well, he was clearly a sick kid. But we have to protect our society. Now, here in California where I am, we have the death penalty. You absolutely should, and they won't kill a 15-year-old. But let's say he was 25 and he did that awful thing. I'd absolutely go to court and testify they shouldn't kill him because he had a very damaged brain. But you can't take away responsibility because if you do that, there'll be chaos. And the fact is, as we talked about earlier, there are people with troubled brains that never do anything bad. And so it's more complicated. And that's why I set it up with, well, there are 4 circles, biological, psychological, social, spiritual. Kip had trouble in all 4 circles, where he had negative thoughts, he was socially isolated, his purpose was to hurt people. And so there was damage to his whole person.
And to the point of healing, I wonder if I had to give you a time machine and if I took you back, say 12 months before his horrendous killing spree, would there be enough tools to be able to help someone like Kip to mitigate, ameliorate, soften the damage and prevent him from doing the diabolical?
Yes. In fact, he had seen multiple psychiatrists. He'd been prescribed Prozac. He was prescribed a stimulant, but nobody knew he had a damaged brain. So if I would have seen that brain, the first thing, I'd go on a hunt to figure out, why is his brain this bad? And, one of the reasons I fell in love with imaging is almost immediately it decreases stigma and it increases compliance. So the family would have likely joined me, and Kip would have likely joined me on the hunt for why does his brain look so bad. And odds are, if they would have been cooperative with me, and most people who come to see me are, we would have uncovered, is it an infection? Is it an environmental toxin? Was it a lack of oxygen at birth that could be repaired? And that's sort of the big message, or one of the big messages of my life, is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better. I can prove it, whether it's medicine, supplements, hyperbaric oxygen, other innovative treatments. And that's what the scan really opened my mind to. There are all sorts of ways to damage your brain, and there are all sorts of ways to make it better.
What's the most easily reversible? So if we look at some of those, I don't know, concentric circles and those different aspects of it, infection, inflammation, cytokine storm, some effect to your brain, that's one side. Maybe people feeling depressed, perhaps it's more psychiatric. But then on the other hand, there's something more fundamental in a neurological sense where there might be more physical damage. I don't know, and I'm wading into territory where it's difficult to speak with authority, but there might be, on the spectrum, as we layer this, tell me what's the easiest to fix and what's the hardest?
Well, the easiest to fix is if you have a healthy brain and you're an undisciplined thinker. So I teach all of my patients to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. And, you know, I was 28 years old in my psychiatric residency when one of our professors said, you have to teach your patients not to believe every stupid thing they think. And I'm like, but I believe every stupid thing I think, right? I mean, high school, college, medical school, there was never a class on how to manage your mind. And that's a bit insane. And so I teach all of my patients to correct and direct their thinking. And if someone has a healthy brain, well, they get better actually pretty quickly. So it's a kind of treatment called cognitive behavior therapy that has been shown to be as effective as antidepressant medication. So much better if you have a healthy brain. If you had anoxia, so if we go to the other end, the hardest brains to treat, the brain is the most oxygen hungry organ in the body. It's 2% of the body's weight, but uses 20% of the oxygen and blood flow in the body. If you have a lack of oxygen, say for 8 minutes or 10 minutes, that can cause potentially permanent, irreversible damage. And those have been the hardest people for us to treat. They often get better, but it takes a lot of effort and a long time.
You've spoken at length about diet and exercise, which foods to eat, which not to eat. Because of time constraints, I'm just going to leave that alone. Maybe it's for another time, or I'd recommend people read your book or your multiple books. There's Change Your Brain Every Day, and there are other books as well. But something that's quite relevant to this, because a lot of people would be watching this on YouTube via a social media platform of sorts, maybe via short clips. Tell me what social media is doing to our brains.
Well, I mean, it connects us, but it also disconnects us. And the worry is it causes us to compare ourselves to others in a negative way. From a neuroscience standpoint, constantly scrolling, you're looking for that one interesting thing, which means you're pushing out a neurotransmitter called dopamine over and over and over and over again. On average in the United States, kids spend 3.5 hours on a social media app a day, which means they're beginning to wear out their pleasure centers. So there's areas deep in the brain that respond to dopamine. But if you hit those areas too hard or too often, you begin to wear them out. And then you begin to feel flat. You begin to feel sad. You begin to feel depressed.
And this is not even going into the rage machine that it fuels and the echo chambers and all of that. That's, that's another aspect of it all. But to the dopamine hit issue and the dopamine depletion, would you say that excessive consumption of social media, especially among young people in their formative years, is similar to a form of alcohol addiction, drug addiction, porn, consumption of violence maybe on TV or online? Is it all in the same basket?
I think it is. Yes. And if a product's free, you're the product.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not paying for the product, it's their manipulation of your mind, your spending habits, your opinions. And that should worry people, that this generation, their families are not their primary connection. It's often whatever social media app they're using.
Yeah. And how do you sort of collectively find solutions or find solutions for the collective? It's well and good and easy to tell individuals to change their ways, change some of their habits. Does it involve needing governments and other authorities getting involved to regulate consumption of social media and the like?
Yes, I think it does, because if something, I mean, here in the United States, there was a recent study, 57% of teenage girls report being persistently sad. Think about that. 24% have planned to kill themselves, and 13% have tried to kill themselves. This is unlike anything we've experienced, certainly in my lifetime, or since I've been a psychiatrist the last 40 years. We have a massive societal problem. And the answer is not more medication. Last year in the United States, there were 337 million prescriptions for antidepressant medication. So a quarter of the population is being drugged. There can't be anything about that that is okay. And, you know, the mission I have a foundation called the Change Your Brain Foundation, is to end the concept of mental illness by creating a revolution in brain health. So if we sort of stop the typical psychiatric, you have these symptoms, take this drug, and go, no, let's get your brain healthy. And then if you need medicine, we have medicine for you. But it's never the first and only thing you think about.
Yeah. And I'm sure I think you were quoting a lot of the studies that have been showcased by the likes of Jonathan Haidt and others regarding the effects of social media, particularly on young brains, and the issues of depression and sadness, particularly among young girls, which is fascinating. We've spoken about this with previous guests on the program. How quickly can you turn a young person's brain around if you create the right conditions and you put them on the right program, to go from a brain that looks terrible under the SPECT scan to one that's looking healthy?
Well, in my book, Your Brain is Always Listening, I start with this story of Bobby, who is the son of this Mexican mafia leader in Los Angeles. And he tried to kill himself. I mean, Bobby was a mess. And doing everything I asked him to do, within 4 months, he's dramatically better. His brain is better. His mind is better. His relationships are better. It doesn't take a long time. But you have to learn to love your brain and then take care of it.
Before we go, I want to ask you about why you had your daughter's boyfriend scanned. Father-in-law from hell? Well, I mean,
I have-
you did become his father-in-law, right? So it all worked out in the end.
Well, I mean, the rule in my house is if you date somebody for more than 4 months, I invite them to the clinic. I actually don't think of you as dating until I can see their brain. And my son-in-law actually wrote a book, Change Your Brain Before 25, and he opens the book with the interaction between me and him about his brain scan. I mean, that's sort of, a core value in our family is brain health. And ultimately, if you don't look, you don't know. And if it was bad, his mother had paranoid schizophrenia. His father committed suicide. I absolutely wanted to see his brain. But he has worked throughout the 20 years that I have known him to have a better brain. And that's a good value, especially if you're parenting my grandchildren.
Dr. Daniel Amen, good to talk to you. I thank you so much for joining us on the interview.
Thank you so much.